Well, we're well aware that this is there's a sparse crowd here. I'd also say that it will make it much more comfortable if we're close to one another and you'd like to come up, that would be great. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. It's just that I'd like to make it more personal. Because, we live right around the corner. And I would rather be touched by you and have us touch you and affect you in some way. That would be great.
We're going to show 5 projects today, and we're going to go through them. Todd will always want to go through them more slowly, and I'll go a little faster, and he'll tell me to back up. So it's going to be, as usual, a sort of discussion between the two of us.
But it's always strange to think of you guys here, and we so close by. I lived Carnegie Hall apartment. We lived there. I first moved into Carnegie Hall in 1974 and lived there until they removed the last tenants of whom. So our very first project we're going to show you is where we lived, which is your neighborhood for so long, and as you probably know, the studio's around the corner.
Now, somehow it's on the computer, but it's not on the screen. So should I back up and see what happens?
I see the light on up there, but I don't see any light here. Okay.
Well, picture this.
Picture Carnegie Hall, that nasty Portson Park building across the way. I'm rather shocked by that building.
That building across the way.
It just hurts. Carnegie Hall, the story is that when Andrew Carnegie built Carnegie Hall, he knew very early on, immediately, that he would help to support the hall, and the hall would work synergistically with studios. And you may all know the story that there were 160 artist studios packed around the main hall to help to work and support the main hall, which he didn't think would really make much money. And that worked very, very well through many, many years. And they increased their idea of what artists were packed around the main hall, Carnegie Hall, to include architects. And in the late 60s, I learned that Charlie Gwathmey, who's no longer living, of Gwathmey Siegel, had a studio there and lived there, and I went and met him, and I thought, well, this is heaven. Wouldn't be best thing in the world to live right around the center of Carnegie Hall, and actually nobody cared to live there except poor artists and poor architects. So the building was filled with interesting characters.
Otherwise, actually, the building was filled with very weird people. But it was a kind of New York phenomenon, and I think one that's kind of fast disappearing because it's now been emptied. But we're going to show this because it's a precedent for a building that we want to talk about. So the red arrow shows up at the very top tower where we lived, and it was a kind of amazing space. And the building, as Todd said, had a series of studios, some of which were occupied by ballet teachers. There are also photographers, bow makers, flamenco dance teachers. It was quite lively.
Body massage artists. Our apartment stood alone, though. After the first couple of years, I was able to get the top floor with a partner who Judy knew very well, Stephen Potters. And we got the top floor, but I basically started that thing, and we would walk up the fire stair here. It was wonderful. Walk up the fire stair there. The elevator stopped the floor below. These are our shoes, Billy's shoes, my shoes. A radiator that was there. A door I'll show. Open the front door. There's my bike there. And then Stephen and I worked in this one space, and later when Stephen moved out, Billy and I turned this into our apartment. This is a drawing made just before we left. This was our conference room, a 5'6" door with 6 chairs, and that became our dining room. Our kitchen was a 2-burner hot plate for 34 years, and an under-counter refrigerator, sink here, the tub and toilet, and the closets here and a kind of little study. And this is the room that our son lived in from the time he was born till the time he moved out and said, "I'm getting out of here," which was at the age of 4. No. But he's turned out to, so this, in fact, we had Joseph Astor come up and photograph the space exactly the day before we left because we had never taken photographs of it. So this was us about 3.5 years ago.
So it has great light, amazing skylights. And we show you this because this also relates to our last project, which was a show that we did for the Venice Biennale. But all throughout our lives, we're very interested in objects and material culture. And so we've always collected things because we love to surround ourselves with various things. They tell us messages, they feed us. We lived up, our bedroom was climbing up those stairs and we slept underneath the skylight. So it was really just a platform beneath the skylight. And this was actually our back door, and this was this was sort of our backyard.
Well,
so it was a kind of magical place, and one of the great things was it was only 2 blocks away from our studio, which is on Central Park South.
well, it was the studio, and then many years ago we bought the studio on Central Park South, which you probably all walk by and don't realize is kind of a great, wonderful space, much like any drafting studio. And so this is the population we have there today, and we basically, my desk is, or Billie's desk and my desk are in among the others.
So that's
We see it as a kind of family situation, much as we're family. But we'll come back to that issue.
So this is a building that was done for the University of Chicago, and it was won through a competition. And things that we thought about were Carnegie Hall, this building that you see here, which is the Manton Arts Center at Johns Hopkins, where they asked us to make a building that would be, there are no specific art programs or art majors at Johns Hopkins, nor is there a real art major at the University of Chicago, but this was something that all the students were interested in doing.
Well,
so it's somewhat
hold it,
extracurricular.
back up, please.
So here we go.
So the basic, I mean, what had this done? We knew about artists and living and the life of artists because we lived in Carnegie Hall, because in certain ways we could see architects as artists. We are toilers enjoying the beauties of the physical world. This particular project was cut into the ground, and you'll see that theme later on. But we had some expertise in the idea of thinking about the lives of artists and students. The next project that we're going to show you is another one that was in a way a precedent, which is at the University of Pennsylvania. We'll show only this one image, which is that it was, other than the Folk Art Museum on 53rd Street, this is our second tallest building until this last year. But what we did in this building is we made the stairway. Now, we always went up the fire stair to our apartment, and we walked the stairs as much as possible. And we believed that fire stairs were useful stairs and beautiful stairs. So in this building, we turned the fire stair into a sculpture. It's actually triples back on itself. Go back. Go.
Sorry.
The stair is poured in place concrete, and you see the profiling of the stair, but you walk up here and loop around, and then you come into this bay and continue up, and you can see it in the model.
So there are 3 bays in the stairs.
What's wonderful in the building is that though there's an elevator, and that's necessary for the building, the fire stairs become the primary means of moving up through the building. You use your senses, you're looking outside. So when we got this competition for the University of Chicago, there in Chicago, we thought of 2 basic precedents for a building, other than it being a tower of the arts. A tower of the arts being Carnegie Hall. We thought of the towers of Chicago. And we also thought of the plains of Chicago. That Chicago is largely horizontal. You can see it in the distance. And yet there are a series of towers. Now, our project was south of Chicago at the University of Chicago.
So this is the site. This is the Midway. It was part of the World's Fair planning.
Of the early 1900s, designed by Olmsted and Vaux.
And primarily the Neo-Gothic campus is on the north side of the Midway. This is the south side of the Midway. It still has academic buildings, although it's mostly been graduate schools on this side. So they wanted to bring students over to the other side, the south side of the campus.
Well, hold it, for 2 reasons. One of them is that they were running out of space on the north side. The other thing is that Chicago realized they have an obligation to begin to connect with the south side of Chicago. It's a social engine for them, which is to begin to relate to the poor south side of Chicago. These are actually the competition images. And we won it largely because other people screwed up worse than we did, which is the way you generally win competitions.
But it still has the tower and the flat building and a courtyard that is also flanked by the building that was their existing art building.
So we built it in a parking lot, and we had a concept of a tower of the arts and then a low horizontal base. This is the conceptual design. When they really looked at it after they gave us this commission, they liked the concept of stacking the arts. They didn't know what that meant. They liked the idea of the arts being combined with one another, but different disciplines themselves also being isolated. Eventually, we began to look at it in the budget, and we simplified it a great deal so we could be on budget. But we still stacked different programs in a tower. And we did so by combining the vertical movement through the tower by, yes, elevators, but 2 fire stairs that were open and exposed in challenging, interesting places.
So the tower became simpler. The cantilever section was lost. But we also believe that we should try to make it a very, very solid tower. I think most of our buildings are quite solid. Almost all the buildings are concrete. Often they're clad in stone. So we felt it both related more to the Gothic buildings on the other side of the campus, and we also felt that we want to make buildings that feel heavy on the ground.
So these models are here trying to pack in those programs into a tight, rather slender tower that we could afford. This is the ultimate model. We took the low base, which had a lot of glass in it and really wasn't required, and we used sawtooth skylights there, giving north light, which is exactly the same light we lived under for 34 years in Carnegie Hall, the backside of which then becomes solar panels. And the plan simplified itself also.
So this way is the Midway. And there's a north-south, we call it a kind of street that runs through the building. These are studio spaces and gallery. This, as you can see clearly, are sort of theaters on the ground level. So there are really 2 front doors. And then this is the base of the tower. And
then on the right-hand side, we see the footprint of the old studios, which are now used as writing studios. So this is just opened this fall and has become a really exciting place at the University of Chicago, we think, and at least we're told by the university and the students.
So you can see, although it's simplified, it still keeps the sense of the tower. And at the very, very top, there's a large performance room because we wanted to make a destination at the very top.
This is actually a view from the tower. Looking north and east, you can see Lake Michigan in the distance, and although you can't see Chicago, you can see the campus across the Midway. And here's a view of the tower now completed. Billy, you can show the green roof, the sawtooth skylights, and it's clear that there's the tower next to us is a Mies van der Rohe building, and a little further on down a wonderful law school by Eero Saarinen.
The building is clad in limestone from
Missouri.
Very long bars. But it's a much more mottled, warmer color because we also wanted to make it feel somewhat more brick-like.
So we said, this stone had not been used on buildings before, but it had been used in gardens. We tested it. It was inexpensive. And we said, give us the full range of color. We don't want you to try to isolate and give us something as pure as Indiana limestone. We'll take the full range. It'll cost less. And so what we see there, Billy, show the stair tower that goes up through the building. We'll see that there are 2 stair towers, and you're always looking out, whether you're looking north as you are here or through the west window. And then there are a series of studios there we'll look at, one of which is out of doors, the design studios there, and then the performance penthouse at the very top.
Yeah, there's both reflective glass, clear glass, and glass that slides away.
It's the Logan Center for the Arts. This is a cafe on the first floor. The fire stair you could see there. One of the larger performance spaces. Another one, a black box theater. We wanted these to really operate completely independent of one another. The shop that's completely under natural light, wonderful shop. And all of these things really packed together in this very, very compressed organization.
So this is all in the low flat building.
One floor up, we have painting studios. This is just, clearly the students are taking over our spaces. It's wonderful.
And also individual studios for some of the older students. This is the lobby that is outside the 3 theaters with a stair that takes you up to the 2nd floor and on its 3rd level to an outdoor courtyard. And here we used glazed tile. We worked with Heath tile to make special glazes. And this is a felt. We worked with a company in New York called Leroy Manet to produce this sort of industrial felt with patterns.
So this stair is actually not a fire stair. It's an ornamental stair going just 2 floors up to the roof garden. And then you can see there's an outdoor space for performance outside. The students are now essentially embedding the art through the building. Piece. This is a fashion show the kids put on out in the small courtyard. And here we are looking down from the fire stair as you go up through the building to the green roofs and to the terrace. You can show the terrace there and a bridge that connects between the buildings. The view from ground level there. And then the kind of diagram of the north-south axis that Billy will show. And then the vertical, there are 2 vertical axes that run right through the building. So that you always have 2 different, certainly as you're going up, you have 2 very, very interesting and different stairs to go up. So
this is still at the ground floor. This is on the north side of the campus. And then on the 2nd floor, looking both into the courtyard and into the shop. So we continued our experiments with Heath, and we both have the tile that you saw in the lobbies where a white color was dipped into a dark charcoal glaze. And then here, these are double dipped so that there's a matte finish tile which is then dipped into a glaze so that each tile has this sort of flicker of different colors.
Creates a kind of system that helps to identify where you are in the building, especially the public portions of the building. So you, for example, now we're in the fire stair and we see the tile on the right side of the fire stair, the poured-in-place concrete structure of the stair. Billy, look up back, please. Back. Back.
It's not going back.
Okay, it's not going back. You saw an art installation up there, up at the top. That was a student's art installation up the top. Place to sit if you're not using the fire stair except for leaving the building. It's really a marvelous space. This is another image inside this fire stair of the glazed tile. And then the open seminar terrace there. This opens and closes depending on the weather, according to what people wish to do. It happens to be a wonderful place for a view out over the lake. And this is an image there looking back at the campus.
From inside the room when the windows open.
And then the performance penthouse at the very top that can be used for dance or for music performances. And a little balcony at the top when you want to have a breather and just go out and reflect with your girlfriend or boyfriend.
Do you want to, I need to actually adjust my contact lens.
Okay.
So you get to.
How do I move this thing forward?
That's why we're partners.
Okay, okay. Is this good? Okay. So you may know that we've recently completed the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. This is a long story, and we'll try to zip through it fairly quickly because it could certainly be an entire lecture. But we'll start with some of the precedents. Maybe you know that we've done the American Folk Art Museum next to the Museum of Modern Art, which is now sadly closed. MoMA now owns the building. Folk art is virtually homeless. They couldn't afford to run the space. It's their loss and our loss. But the folk art museum was intended to be a very, very intimate experience, also using poured-in-place construction and making sure that the galleries were small and intimate, congested, not a little unlike the John Soane's house in London.
Well, it's a very purpose-built museum, and the Barnes is a very purpose-built museum.
Yeah. This is Soane's house, which was an inspiration for us. You may have studied that in London. This is his own home and his own idea, and he brought light magically into this incredible collection of material.
And so clearly the Barnes Foundation was also a home museum. And then finally the Frick. We were interested in the Frick because of the wonderful garden room where you felt connected to something that was more natural, and it was a respite from the intensity of looking at the art. And then this is a project that we did at the University of California. It's an East Asian library. And it's really just a box for books, but it's a box that's cracked open at the top and brings natural light in. So we were thinking about all of these, both other people's projects, precedents, and work that we had done in the past. So this is the site of the building that held the Albert Barnes's collection, and it's in Lower Merion. There's also a horticultural program, which is run through these greenhouses and outbuildings, and then his own house, which was connected by a sort of porte cochere to the gallery space.
Which Paul Kray designed, and all of this was done in the early 1920s. This is the Paul Kray building that really housed the art. Well, long story short, Albert Barnes dies in an automobile accident in 1951, and his estate has to remain forever in this exact location, and no material can ever be loaned. In fact, it couldn't be photographed, and Barnes had a very, very strange policy by which he admitted people. So what had happened by the late, and there are films about this, and there will be more and more films and books, basically by the late 1990s, the foundation was losing $500,000 a year because of the restrictions on the property. They felt the only thing they could do was to challenge the basics of the will to save the collection, and they did. And then they put it out for architects to basically vie for the commission. There were many of us that went after it, and we were able to win it. The requirement was that we had to reinstall the collection exactly as it is, which means, Billie? Well, go back and say what it means.
Essentially, the paintings are hung. This you see is a kind of slightly anomalous to the way the paintings are hung. But the paintings are always hung both symmetrically in relationship to each other and with hardware installed around it. This one happens to be a larger gallery with this triptych by Matisse. But they're very particular ensembles that posit relationships between painting, hardware, and furniture. So every time you look at a wall, you'll see anywhere from between 20 to 50 different works of art on one wall, and they're all related to each other. So this is the gallery as it was. And it was a very intense experience. So when we went in to talk to them, we said, as it exists now, it's a gallery in a garden. But when it moves to downtown Philadelphia, it would be wonderful if we could bring the sense of the garden into the gallery. And we brought with us this tiny little model, which was just all brown wood. And we slid it apart and dropped in these pieces of green plexiglass, saying, the building needs, or the experience needs, to be able to breathe a little bit more. And we said you could keep all of the ensembles the same, but by just sort of cutting at the very ends and slipping in this space, you could bring a sense of relief to the entire experience.
And we did this also by analyzing Paul Kray's plans. It's a very long story, and we've just come out with a book that tells the entire story of this in our own words, so we can move on. But this is the building actually as it was being completed last spring. And you can see that it sits on the Philadelphia's Parkway, and at the very far end, then you can see the Philadelphia Museum of Art. We can see the Philadelphia Free Library, the Franklin Institute, and you can't really see
behind the trees is
the Rodin Museum. But all of these buildings, with the exception of our building, the Barnes, which Billie will point out, were done by 1929. And the only building that had been added in all of that time was the House of Detention, which sat on our site. And unfortunately, it was a very, very sad place, where basically a youth house of detention. So the city of Philadelphia said, look, for various reasons, we'll give you this piece of property if you move the collection to Philadelphia. It'll help the city of Philadelphia. It'll give you the audience you need to have, and it'll also allow this collection, which Albert Barnes always believed should be for the people, to move from the rich suburbs into the center of Philadelphia and to be accessible to more people.
So the plan, this is the Franklin Parkway, really talks about a kind of civic garden. And it really runs along here. These are existing London plane trees that are 200 years old. There's a very, very long pool of water, and you really walk through a kind of civic garden, up an alley, into a more private sense of a garden, alongside this long water body, and then walk into this the sort of support space, which has a planted roof, which is why it appears green. So the whole idea is that the building sits within a garden.
This is the simplified plans of the building at that first level. And Billie will point out where you walk in. We wanted people to delay their walk into the building so they would encounter the garden. Then we wanted to make sure there was a domestic feel and a grand feel, for that also existed at Marion. And here you're seeing the entrance space. We're looking at a very large indoor-outdoor room, which relates to the project in San Francisco or in Berkeley, which is that. We have changing exhibits galleries, which will be very important. Next spring, there'll be an exhibition of Ellsworth Kelly there. There's a cafe on the first floor, which will help them in many ways, both create a place for the audience to go. There was no place for people to go in Marion. There's back of house space, and then there are the galleries, sequence of galleries, which remain intact, every one of the rooms intact.
This is where we
inserted
the garden, and this is where we inserted a classroom.
So it's exceedingly simple. This is a very strange section, but maybe it'll be clear as we go through this. Essentially, we're bouncing light into the space. The building, this is the first LEED Platinum building of this type in America. The entire roof of that glass box is solar panels. It happens to be a very, very environmentally sensitive building, although it uses a lot of energy. It uses it in a responsible way. The image from the parkway then allows the windows on the parkway to be open. We're using glass technology that allows us to look into the parkway. These windows face south, as they did in Marion, and there are no windows that were not there in Marion. So the windows we felt were part of the idea of the ensemble.
So essentially, this facade reflects the neoclassical planning of Cray, because the windows are all symmetrical and they are all mullioned, because that's the way it was in Marion. As you enter the sort of civic garden, you start to see the building changes and becomes, in a certain sense, has a more contemporary language, although it still keeps a kind of tripartite horizontal banding that happens from the front. As you enter on the north side, it really becomes really quite mute and quiet. So there are very few openings on this side. The stone itself is very lively. It's an Israeli limestone, and we asked once again, as we did in Chicago, for the full range, so that there's quite a bit of change within the patterning of the stone itself. And then we thought about how to design the facade, and Barnes was very, very important in his collecting and his collection of African art. And so we thought about kente cloth, which is really a cloth that's woven in separate strips, and then these strips are sewn together. And so we started to think about these as bands that would have irregular vertical divisions. So what you see in the building is a rain screen where the part that's set back is stainless steel. The face is that limestone from the
negative. But this is a way by which we could put a wrapper around all of the buildings and unify them, whether the facade was neoclassical or not. And it also, once again, because we went not only to research the quarries and to where the stone was ultimately cut, which is in Bethlehem, we learned how to most efficiently use the stone. This is the image looking back at the Free Library now. This is as you walk in. We once again use the stairs to try to encourage people. Oh, there's an elevator there on the left where the woman is looking up. There's a stair with a chandelier that we designed to help to suggest that people should walk down that stair into the lower level. You always see concrete in our work, and you also see it juxtaposed against other materials, because we're trying to take that common body of the material and use it in a way, foundational concrete, to become part of the basic palette of materials. Here we are, we've just stepped in and are looking back to the landscape.
The floor is a mosaic, which was based on a traditional African textile weaving pattern called liar's cloth.
Actually, not done exotically, but rather by a family from Brooklyn who had never done something like this before at the scale. When you walk into the space, it's really a grand and shockingly large space, which is really a kind of an indoor-outdoor space, a way to wait before you go into the galleries, or when you come out of the galleries. It also is an event space. And it does bring in this natural light in an indirect way so that the windows to the galleries are still windows where they should be. And people can converse and hear one another. We brought the stone inside, and then a long veil of glass that allows the offices to look in. This is a diagram of the way the light bounces into the interior.
Which is really a variation on what we did at Berkeley.
Outside, that space continues, but the volume is flipped. So we have a very, very large cantilevered volume that extends out here.
And covers
but it allows you
people
to be out of doors, walk outside from basically the galleries, to step outside and enjoy, again, nature. So it's always trying to push this idea of nature. Here we are in the Changing Exhibits Gallery, as at Folk Art. We once again are expressing the structure, the common structure, the concrete, and then basically applying to that concrete the walls that are the walls for the art.
A window to the water outside. Details of the light court. It's a combination of, as Todd said, of the acid-etched glass where offices are, hand-chiseled limestone, this fabric which was woven by Claudia Youngstra, who did the fabric in the Harmony Atrium, if any of you, the Rubenstein Atrium, if any of you have walked through there.
And then sketches for these very, very large bronze doors, also using a kind of an abstraction of an African motif. And then here we are looking into the galleries, and different now from Marion. Basically, all of the windows of the galleries look out into the garden that the building is in. So the galleries are really hung. They're exactly as they were before, but every single detail has been changed. And so this is an example. On the right is the galleries we were told to replicate, and on the left is the ones as we've replicated them. So we very slightly adjusted virtually everything, including the window frames, which had opaque glass in them and had curtains drawn, and white painted metal. We brought in the wood to try to warm it and connect it with basically what was the intention of Dr. Barnes in 1920s.
So a lot of people feel that it's exactly the same as it was, but actually everything is different. And on the upper galleries, we brought in a clear story light, and it's buffered once again by acid-etched glass. And so this has been shaped so that the light falls down to the walls. We wanted to light the room and not light specific pieces of art, because in many ways lighting the room is much more a domestic way of lighting. And this is one of the classrooms that was inserted in parallel to the garden spaces.
The gallery spaces. And actually that table we'll see we're trying to always keep this as a family. That table was designed by a friend who we'll see later. This is the garden that was inserted into the gallery spaces, but that garden actually sits one level below grade, so it would be about this level in the building, and it goes right through the building to the sky. So here we can actually step out into this lower level garden. And Billy, I think on the next image will show that down there we have a library at the back. We have Dr. Barnes' pots that he had collected. We have an auditorium, and have turned this into something that feels a little like a living room. So even though there were 20 feet below grade, you have a good sense of being connected to the out of doors. Once again, you see the construction of the building, the poured in place concrete.
So this is the third of the 5 projects. Is it third? Yeah, third. It's a dormitory that was just completed at Haverford. One of the earlier dormitories we did many, many years ago was this small tower at Princeton. And there we really tried to compress the building as much as possible and make it feel heavy.
And then we did dormitories at the University of Virginia, where we tried to really make them as lines into the landscape. And this was shortly after they're completed, but now these are 20 years old. Largely they're made of singles and doubles, but we also had a dining facility that we created in a master's house there. But when we got the project for Haverford, the basic planning had been done by Kieran Timberlake, who's a wonderful firm from Philadelphia, and they proposed this as a plan, which is a relatively conventional dormitory plan. You have single rooms. You could point them out here are single rooms. Here we have double rooms. You have an elevator, a study, bathrooms, little lounges at the end, and the fire stairs. And we analyzed that, and because we had done 2 dorms, we thought, okay, at Haverford, unfortunately, the students are fortunate. This is a Quaker school, and every student, when we met them, said they wanted their own single. Well, that became a problem for us, a budget problem. So we looked at if we took the Kieran Timberlake plan and what we would have to do to it if we stretched it out and gave everyone a single and put the lounges at the end and so on. And then we thought it out, is what would happen if we made a very large central corridor and essentially had a corridor that ran around both things and created 2 living rooms, the purple or the living rooms, and a courtyard in the center. And it turned out that if we could get rid of the fire stairs and the elevator, we could make a much more efficient and better quality building for the same price. The trick was we had to put 2 of them one on top of each other. They were identical 1-story buildings that didn't require sprinklers, didn't require fire stairs. We'd done fire stairs before. How could we make this a very, very cheap but well-built building? So
there's no connection between the 1st and 2nd floor except through the outside, and we'll explain that. So it's a very beautiful campus, very, very green. Our site was this parking lot across from the student center and the student athletic building.
No parking was needed. We took the parking lot, which you see at the top, and it had been put in on fill, and they had thrown debris into the ground. And we basically cut and filled the plan, packed the debris as a kind of package in the center of it, and used that for water detention, and then put 2 buildings, one on top of each other, but then they exit out onto the berm.
So the upper floor exits here.
So that they both have at-grade exiting.
Here.
And there's a matter of cut and fill, but it all balanced out rather well. The project, then, these are the architectural drawings of the project rather than the conceptual drawings. And it's just been finished. We used this, we created the artificial berm, which is the dark piece, and then built these 2 dorms, actually, fortunately, on or below the budget that they asked. This is the planning. It had to be extremely repetitive. And then these are them just this fall when they were just being used. The landscape has not come in, but you can see they're stacked one on top of each other. The roofs are green roofs. We've taken mechanical equipment and screened it on the roof.
And then this is the berm, accessed by stairs or path. And these are the bridges that cross over. And this is the lower level.
So I think in a few years, this is the final plans that we can see have 2 sort of kitchen areas around a small courtyard in each of the rooms. This is the detail of walking in from the bridge. Yeah, these are the living rooms. We'll show that. Students, the bricks are beautiful bricks, actually called Columba bricks. It's something that Peter Zumthor helped develop in Denmark. And then our poured in place concrete as usual. The gardens that have just been installed. The idea of using the landscape as your extension of your building. And then inside this, we played once again with this Leora Manet fabric to help to create inexpensive but durable wall surfaces that would give some imagination to the hallways.
We also wanted very durable hallways, so it's this very, very tough industrial felt and heath tile.
So we've been able to build all of this at the very highest quality. All the doors are oak, and we were able to design the furniture in a very simple way so that we designed all of the students' furniture working with the students so they could be assembled in different ways in in their rooms, and these were built in Long Island City. And then the study rooms look out into the landscape. This is one of the student kitchens, and then looking toward the study, and then looking into the interior court, and the interior court that brings light to the center of the building.
So that's a lighter version of the same brick used outside.
And this wall will be covered in vines and a tree eventually. The final of the big projects, but it's now it's under construction here in New York City. It's in Prospect Park. And the precedents on this are a project we did in La Jolla in 1992, where we decided to cut the building into the land. So this is about cutting a building into the land.
This is a project for the Cranbrook Educational Community in Michigan. And here, because it was a pool, we realized that our most powerful elevation is the ceiling.
And that we realized that instead of air conditioning a pool to dehumidify it, if we use natural ventilation, it would be a much better idea and a more sensual idea. And then the idea of a large covered space we came to from a project we did in Phoenix, where shading was crucial, and the ceiling plane becomes one of the design elements.
So this is Prospect Park, and proud Brooklynites say that Olmsted and Vaux practiced on Central Park, but they perfected in Prospect Park.
So
and our site is this parking lot. We seem to be attracted to parking lots. This was the original Olmsted and Vaux plan. So this parking lot used to be a carriage concourse. And this is all water, the sort of swirly bits.
Artificial water is Central Park.
They had a small thing called Music Island, which had eventually gotten filled in and became the site of a very bad rink. But this was before it was filled in. This is after it was filled in, so here's the parking lot.
3 years ago.
And then here is the place that used to be the island that was infilled and became the skating rink.
So our project gets rid of this old rink and restores Music Island. Billy pointed up there, restores the Olmsted and Vaux edge, and then adds 2 ice rinks. In fact, the combination of these 2 rinks together, and they connect, is the largest single continuous surface of artificial ice in America when it's completed. There's a green roof over the hockey rink to keep the rain and the sun from the roof. And then the buildings are embedded into the ground.
So the land berms up so you can walk easily up to the roof, both roofs, and this becomes a long terrace. Here you can see a sort of pulled back version, and you can see its relationship to the lakeside.
So we vastly reduced the amount of impervious surface. Here the 2 rinks are connected. Some days they'll connect free skating with the ice rink. The ice rink is a regulation ice rink, so the 2 activities can be separated. And in the summertime, the oval surface becomes a water play, and the ice rink is roller skating, or it could be for other parties or events.
So the wintertime, summertime.
And then just briefly, early sketches of the walking into the building. Here I am up in Canada looking for stone that would be inexpensive, and an inexpensive way of cutting the stone. When you go to a quarry, you also find out what the best stone is and how you best cut it. In this case, we're about 150 miles north of Ottawa, and still within 500 miles, and they're guillotining the stone. So we decided if they could just cut the stone right there with the materials they've got, we would be able to use that. So stone is all guillotined, which you can see here. And then we're laying it up. This is a sketch as you walk into the rinks. This is actually as it is today, or maybe 3 weeks ago, no, nearly a month ago. This long element will be a mural that Billy has done in tile, and the ceiling of the rink is there. That's actually a Photoshop job. The ceiling is accurate.
The ceiling is real.
So the ceiling has these marks. It's kind of from a drawing that I did of the idea of people doing figures in the ice.
But these are places where people will be able to walk gently up the bermed earth to the tops of the 2 roofs. So these are really set into the ground, and you don't really know that they're there as buildings until you really walk through this sort of narrow passageway.
the idea of even illumination, which is right for the hockey, and then irregular illumination for a sense of mood or change. And the space now, actually it's further along. The final project is really, it comes back to the very earliest thing we showed, which is Carnegie Hall in the studio, and a sort of sense of family. We were invited to the Venice Biennale by David Chipperfield, whose theme was common ground, and he said, what would you like to do? And we knew that we didn't want to make a huge project there. We said, let's do something modest and let's do the least amount of work
Let's see if we can make other people do our work. And so we are interested in this idea of a Wunderkammer, and also there's a box by Joseph Cornell. And this sort of cabinet of curiosities seemed to be a possibility as a sort of theme. And so what we did is we decided, our site, by the way, was mostly not found by anybody. So where are we?
We're right up there in the corner after E. Go up in that little green area.
We're there,
It's the Garden of the Virgins. Nobody's ever been there.
You had to sort of have
any
walked
virgin.
through
But
a lot of the Arsenale and a lot of other places to get there. And we first thought about the Arsenale, which some of you may know is a very, very long, long, narrow building.
monumental.
And we thought we would take this space, and we thought about taking boxes and making this sort of cabinet of curiosity, and it just seemed so teeny inside this giant space. So we thought
Could you give us a really odd, weird, smaller space? And
yeah,
he found this thing
you
called
kind of
Casa Scaffali there.
enter here, and you sort of walk through here and walk through here.
By
and
about
then
this
you
time,
walk
you're
down
really
here,
exhausted.
Walk down
you know.
here.
By this
walk
time,
down
you've taken your
here,
last
go
pee,
here.
and you don't get there. Well, okay.
So it was at the end of the line.
But we were totally happy. This is Casa Scaffali on the inside and the outside. So it was an amazing and weird building because it was essentially a bush. Casa Scaffali means the house of shelves. Judy would know that. And it's also a place where they kept seeds for the garden, for the Arsenale. So it was a seed house, and it hadn't been used before. Our friend Stephen Eno, who did the table for the barns, has a shop in Paterson, New Jersey. We asked him to make these wooden boxes. They're each about this big. And then we sent the boxes. We said, would you fill a box and send it to Venice, and we will open the box and arrange it as we wish. So you can see the names of the people that we've asked. We asked 34 friends, and they all accepted. Stephen made the boxes, and then we sent them to various places in the world. And then they arrived in Venice, and we decided that we and a couple of friends, that Stephen Eno, Billy, and our son there, would install the show. So this was 5 days before the Biennale opened, and we opened up these amazing boxes and said, holy crap.
We asked people to send things put things in the box that inspired them. And we asked that they not be architectural in nature. Of course, some people couldn't help themselves, and you might be able to sort of guess when you see who they were. But we really wanted them to be things that inspired you. So to go back to the sort of our apartment, things that inspire us from life.
So the place was a mess. This was 5 days later when we had installed the boxes on the shelves.
This was a piece by Max Scoggin and Meryl Elam. So Meryl sent a feathered black cape that she had designed and made.
Back in the 70s.
Max sent a pair of red leather pants that he used to wear when he was riding a motorcycle. And the studio made a pair of legs to go inside the pants. So that's what we found inside that box. But they're quite amazing.
Here in front of us, so we have the boxes of Glenn Murcutt and Wendy Lewin.
Well,
Yohani Palesma up there. Our own son to the left. Marwan Al-Sayed further left. Brad Clofel here. Marlon Blackwell there. Stephen Hole down below. This is a box by our friend Stephen Eno, who was the cabinet maker, who built the boxes, and then he obsessively filled his box.
This is by a piece of sculpture by Ursula von Redingswald.
And this is Peter Zumthor's sent in pigments. And this is Yohani Palesma arranging his box actually in Finland.
This piece of bread he was putting in there. He also put in old passports.
This is Zumthor's, just sent pigments.
Well,
but sent exactly how they should be arranged. You can see the boxes the boxes then had the patina of the travel, which was part of our idea, which is that the patina of the travel would be part of it. We had signed each of the boxes and then had their names on it. This is Brad's. So we used the lid of the box and then the graphics that we'd put on them in New Jersey. Scafidio and Diller and Renfro. Richard Meyer chopped up his catalogs. He'd often done collages or had somebody chop them up and put them in a box. Toyo Ito, this is Matt Baird, who used to work for us and has a wonderful studio downtown. He took objects from his office and actually embedded them in books. Fantastic amount of work called Casa Scafali Folio.
Stephen Hole.
Yeah,
I think there are projects underneath here.
Yeah, he vacuum packed his projects under there because we said we couldn't show them and sent this. Claudia Youngster, once again, who did the work at Rubenstein Atrium, did balls of yarn that she had dyed.
She called this Adoring Rumpelstiltskin.
And Toyo Ito took fragments from the Tsunami that had been written on and filled a box with them.
This is Tom Main.
Who couldn't help himself.
Gold-leafed. And then this last one is by our son and his design partner, Chen Chen.
And they were the only ones that took the box and cut it up and made it a very, very small, very dense box.
But that box contains all the wood that box had and filled it with an 8-ball. So
with Venetian water in it. Anyway, that's our project and a little of the story that I hope will take us from Carnegie Hall to the Casa Scafali and a journey through our architectural work and back. So I want to thank you for being here, and I'm hoping that we can actually have an open, pleasant conversation. We're happy to take any questions you might have. So thank you. Sure.
It looks like that's a friendly thing.
Yeah, but how about you? You're going to fire us.
First of all, are there any, let's have some questions.
If you'd like to. Yeah, that would be great if there are, and it would be good if the lights came on so we could see you. Can that happen?
I would ask the first question. Did you fill up every shelf?
No, we didn't. We didn't have very good drawings of Casa Scafali, and we did it. And the first shelf that existed was at this height, which would make it really difficult for you. It's about this height. So we only used the shelf at this level and a few that went down below because anyway, it was a kind of problem. For example, Stephen's box needed to be set, you needed to look down on. So unfortunately, we had to put his box on the floor, and Tom's was sufficiently powerful that we also thought it could be on the floor. So we used our license. Glenn and Wendy sent their box full of stuff, and as did Mac and Marilyn. We had to pull it out and figure out what the hell to do with it because it was a mess in the box. So it was really, it was a kind of like a charrette that you would have if you were, given a series of odd elements.
First of all, that's an incredibly pretty room. I have never been in that room at the Arsenal. But I'd also ask you, maybe you would say, at least on this project in particular, a little bit more on what the Curiosity Chamber is for our students, because I'm not so sure they're familiar with this tradition.
Okay. Yeah, well, you can also help us. In a way, a Cabinet of Curiosities is something that's been in existence for a very long time. A Wunderkammer means a wonder house in German, and it comes from people collecting things obsessively. And certainly in the 1800s, people did collect obsessively. They began to look at elements. That certainly happened with
Darwin?
What?
Darwin?
Well, Darwin, but I'm also thinking of John Soane. I mean, he collected neoclassical elements. Napoleon sent his minions out to document the ruins and so on, and people began to collect things in obsessive ways. And then, we could see in the 20th century people like Joseph Cornell actually doing artwork where he's assembling this idea. And if we look at the work of some of the Renaissance painters, we would see that their paintings are full of details of life. So they would not only show the Annunciation, but they would begin to show life embedded. So I think this idea of a kind of cabinet of curiosities, a kind of Wunderkammer, is something that's been around a long time. And we realize that we, as architects, maybe even you, as architects, young architects, tend to collect stuff that seems to be of no value, but pretty soon it becomes something that's valuable. And if it's not, you either discard it or you love the simplicity of the thing you saw and found.
Because if you go, for instance, in Germany, in Munich, in all the residence palaces of the kings, everyone has their secret room or their room full of their own treasures. And I would also say, for instance, if I may add, in Italy, in the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, there's this gigantic room, but off this room there's this little magic door that goes into a studiolo or a little tiny room. And I don't know if you've been in that little room. It's just sometimes not open. And you walk inside, and there the Medicis had asked painters to paint paintings on 2 levels of shelves, but they were actually doors that would open. But each painting painted, one would be coral, and then another would be gems, and you would open the door, and that box or painting behind it would contain the treasure of that particular.
Well, I don't know that. I'm ashamed to say it, though I've been there many times. But it just shows that the tradition is a long one. And you know, it's interesting to speculate on whether this idea of just collecting things obsessively is, people put it against this sort of idea of ordering stuff, you know, controlling life, creating a Renaissance palazzo, and then realizing they've got all this messy stuff that they love and are interested in, and somehow feeds their emotions, even as the palazzo might feed their intellect.
See, what I'm a little worried about in modern time is that students, and I, of course, having been to many of these students' homes, aren't sure how precious certain objects are to collect. I mean, it's okay to collect.
Yeah, well, I think it's okay to collect. I believe, we believe it. We say that in our lives. I mean, I always imagine that I would be a hoarder. Now, you know, there are some hoarders you don't want to be like. I guess there's even a reality show on hoarders. But there's a kind of fantasy of being a hoarder and never letting go of anything. And I just say that's a part of the disease that at least we have, and maybe some of you have, and I think it's okay.
There was a question there.
Oh, yeah,
I just was wondering how that impulse to collect and the fascination with the Wunderkammer intersects with your desire to create quiet places and do work that's really very stripped down. So
yeah, that's interesting. So we know Leslie, who worked for us and who you may know, and she's a friend. Yeah, how does that jive with our work?
Well, I think one of the things, I think we're very interested, you were talking about matter or material, and I think the sort of physical world, we just had reviews, we were teaching this semester at Yale, and Peter Eisenman was on our jury, and he started out by saying, you know, I'm a conceptual architect. I don't believe in phenomenology, which I never really can quite understand what he's saying, but basically, you know, he was saying that experience for him wasn't important, and that for us, experience is so important, and experience is tied into materials. And so I think the love of things and materials, it's true that when you have a huge amount of stuff, it isn't exactly a quiet space, but I think what it represents is that you are connected emotionally to the material world. And
well, interesting, Peter sent in a piece here to us which broke in passageway into 1,000 pieces. But even at Yale, when we were there last week, he has a show of his collection of books, 3,000 books that he's donated to the Beinecke. And if that's not a cabinet of curiosities, I don't know what is. So he too has the problem. He just didn't admit it. He's sensually attracted to books.
But I think it's an interesting...
Leonardo always said, things are more important than words. I mean, this is Leonardo da Vinci. It's not a bad thing to remember when you're a poor writer as I am. See?
Or when you're up against Peter Eisenman.
Yeah.
But It's an interesting question to me whether students in architecture school now collect things. Do you love things?
I don't know.
Collect things, our students, raise your hand if you like to collect it.
So
Yeah, that's good.
it's not generational.
Well, I'm
I
happy.
think it's,
There's a whole bunch of collectors up there. That's good. But do you have a? Is your apartment too small? Put your hands up. Yeah, it's always too small. So that's the kind of conundrum that we've got, and we do go through these stages of purging, and organizing. And when we left Carnegie Hall, we had no idea how many things we had stowed away under the beds and cabinets, and it was just horrible. But actually, many people said, "Why didn't you participate?" And it was just a nightmare to think of participating in this thing ourselves. So all we did was to ask other people to do the work, and we did the installation. So,
More questions or comments?
about the work or anything?
She's allowed to push people.
Yeah, there's somebody way back there, and it's.
Is there a,
Can we get the lights on in here? It's
talk
just,
about,
I
some of your
feel like,
precedents?
yes. Mike, lights.
But it's too short.
Okay, you're really on display.
So you've talked about some direct precedents in Saarinen's work, but having seen all of your work, or at least a lot more than I've ever seen before, it seems like there is this continuing influence of his work on yours. Is that true, or?
Yeah, well, I think of that being the case, sure.
which Saarinen?
Yeah, well, I think that both
maybe a
Aliel
little
and
of
Arrow
each.
Saarinen. I grew up in Michigan, and I had the luxury of being able to be in that world. I even met Arrow Saarinen when I was young. And he was a kind of hero, but when I went to school, came east here, everybody said this guy's a loser, and so on and so forth. So you have your instincts and what you're born with, and then you're taught to think a certain way, and then eventually you begin to have your instincts merge with what you're taught. But I think that it's impossible to shake your early influences, and it's not good to shake them too. It's also good to find them and to find a place for them.
Yeah, because it seems that your work is independent of a lot of, architecture seems to be largely dominated by Peter Eisenman and people who sort of followed his lead. And it's sort of refreshing to see work that's not based on whatever some French novelists work about the end of the world. So it's, it seems to be a much more upbeat, positive, hopeful architecture, which I also associate with both Saarinen's.
Well, thank you. And I attribute that to two things. A, being able to eventually accept Saarinen into my life after working for Richard Meyer, who I adored for 6 years, and having Peter Eisen as my teacher, you were taught something quite different. At the same time, I'd say that it really also has to do with having Billie in my life, who really sees things in an absolutely opposite way to the one I do, and realizing that we have to weave things together, personalities and desires. And so I think that Billie, whose thesis advisor was Charles Moore, and you may know that Moore was an obsessive collector himself of odd things. And, I've many times sort of complained to Billie about Moore, but she fortunately has him in her heart and soul, and she's brought him to the table. So we bring things forward as we go. And, I just think that some of them are your past, and some of them are demons of your past that you fight.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well,
That's
I guess.
okay.
Any other questions? Any comments about the other projects?
Yeah.
Yes. Could you stand up at the microphone?
Yeah, sorry. You got to stand up.
I can speak louder.
Okay, really loud so they can hear you. Thank you. Now you.
So it's going through the process which leads to your project, and you explain so in a so poetic way. It seems that almost like to go and read the pages of the Poetic of Space, the Bachelard book about how every detail reminds you something. Every imperfection in material, it's part of the project and gives almost like a different value to the project as well. So considering all different colors of the stone, I don't want perfect stone, but I want to see what it really is and how that can become kind of composition as well. So it's almost like to see how those pages from literature can be translated in real space and architecture. And often we try with our students to kind of lead that more than from the value of the image, which now seems to be the object of the collection, right? Images which are there on my iPad, and I don't need to collect because I know that they're always there. I know that I will find there, so there is no need to have physically object there. So it seems that difficult to the transfer from the abstraction of the object and how that object becomes part of the project and in some way gives a different value to the space that you build, different feeling of people living in that space. So I want it's not a question, it's just a comment about how we can transfer from literature world to architecture, that kind of poetic of space as the feeling, and the value of details and the value of imperfection as well, of materials, of materialities as part of the project.
No, that's to me a beautiful statement, and I appreciate that. And Billie, do you want to say anything to add on to that?
Well, I always feel that when you show, when you do a lecture, it's in a certain way, each picture is also a kind of lie, because you don't ever, just like looking at a picture of food, it's not the same as eating it, and it's not the same as really understanding it by being there. So that's why we always want to go back to the real thing, and the image will never suffice. The great thing about reading wonderful words is that you don't have a picture and that you are imagining it inside your head, which to me has more legitimacy than having the movie of the novel. I'd rather have the novel and imagine it. So I think it all comes back to the sort of human experience, what you imagine, what you see, what you taste, what you touch. And I think as architects, we are part of a physical world, and we have the great joy of making things in the physical world, so we have to be totally connected to the physical world. And we use digital tools all the time, but that still doesn't separate us from the connection to the physical world. That's what we do. We make things.
Well, I think that's right, and that's why I think it's very important for you to value your own lives and the things that you have in your lives that are there to give you comfort every day. The things that you know are important to you are going to actually be important almost certainly to someone else. The need for warm material, as an example. The need for the fuller range of colors and those senses that we have. If we are constantly being deprived of things, and it's good, the deprivation is good only to bring the poignancy of what it is that you've got. But in the end, we can't live deprived lives. We need to live rich and full lives. And that's a really interesting challenge for us as architects and young architects too. So.
This somehow goes back to, I can't resist the comment. I really have to make it. One of my colleagues in the audience comes always into my apartment and says, "This isn't an apartment. This is either a museum or else a furniture warehouse. Why do you have so many chairs that are so uncomfortable? People want to," and I can't help it. I buy the chairs because I like the chairs, and if no one wants to sit in them, I can't worry about that. So it's a very interesting sort of, if you like what something looks like, and it's very hard to explain, but it's like the chair is more important for me than worrying about that every chair I happen to have isn't very comfortable. But now I get nervous and think maybe I better go buy a comfortable chair. I better go buy a chair for my guest. Oh, a couch. He's just divulged himself. But the point is that you want to wake up, and in the physical world, we don't want to be deprived, you know. And I think that what you're talking about is really important as a different approach to thinking about what architecture is, and you bring up something that our students don't necessarily hear, which is how we populate our own worlds, that we are part of the physical environment. So Billie, it's really important that what you say is that we are part of this environment, this physical world. And what do we possess or touch? And one of the frustrating things about architecture schools, one of my big peeves, and when I taught at Yale for so long, was everyone had to do exterior skins. I just didn't want to see a building without a design of the exterior with a material attached to it. And I think those things that you've brought up in all of the images you've showed, you know, that exquisiteness of material is really important. But there is one thing I'd like you to talk some more about that I find really beautiful that you said. When that project that they showed of the swimming pool, where was the swimming pool?
It's in Michigan.
Cranbrook.
Yeah.
But Cranbrook. You showed, the first time I ever saw that, you showed that as a colored image that was not black and white, but in color. Yeah. And it was one of the most beautiful rooms I've ever seen because of the glow of the blue and the natural light. Yeah. And then you showed this last project, the skating ring, where you showed you scribed into the ceiling. Yeah. And you said the best elevation was the ceiling. And I think what you both have brought out here for me is this ability to look at something, you don't look at things standardly. A ceiling suddenly becomes the elevation. And I think you do a lot of that, because that dormitory at Haverford, yeah. Who would have thought you could have solved a 2-story building without having the interior stair? Yeah. So I want to know where your mind, how you wrap your minds around approaching these problems that come up with these unusual solutions, besides the fact that you have wonderful eyes.
Well, for me, I always want to, I want to see where I can have an effect. And budget's always part of it. And also growth is part of it. That's why we showed the other dorms, is that the only reason to do a third set of dorms is not because of the money, because it doesn't matter. I mean, you know, it's nice to have the job, but if you can do something that you learn from other projects, that's really super important to me. So I both was really proud of the stairs that we had done before, but it also sort of pissing me off that I became so reliant on this as a device. And I knew that it was costly. In fact, one of the biggest problems at Chicago was that it did make the budget, but the goddamn stair was ridiculously expensive. So I was feeling a little disgruntled about that, or you begin to see that, well, I can't make any headway on something, but most everyone forgets the ceiling plane. I mean, you don't have to put those tables and chairs that you've got in your apartment. I can work on your ceiling plane when someone else tells me what to do on the ground. So it's usually a kind of struggle to find our way into the project. Just one way to find our way into the project is enough. That's what I would say, and it comes from a kind of practical basis of saying, you know, look, I try to take everybody's money, every last dime they've got. If they've got money for a project, I'll take it and use it and try to deliver the best project we can, but I want to give them the best money for their bang for the buck. So we always started out and saying concrete's important. You don't have to have Ondo's concrete. You don't have to have Kahn's concrete. You can take the shit concrete that they build the foundations of and bring that into the building and bush hammer it or sandblast it, abrade it in some way, and you already have your starting material done. And you've got my first material in the building. So it's kind of interesting to find the ways into projects. And I think that's how at least I'm getting those answers, is out of desperation or something? I don't know.
I think one of the things you're very interested in, because you are a very physically restless person, is circulation. Yeah. And I think a lot of the work, like thinking about the dormitories at Haverford, it's how can you move from one place to another? I mean, because basically you just don't want to sit still and you want to always be moving.
I want
So
multiple routes.
You're trying to figure out, yeah,
Escape routes.
Many escape routes from
And how to connect.
where
Yeah.
you are. I think one of the things,
I mean, escaping like from you, and not from
Yeah.
the building. But, you know, we want to encounter
when
one
I come
another
after you,
sometimes and
let's
want to, you know, I'm just saying, you don't always want to do the same thing yeah.
and so I think that has a lot to do with the planning of buildings. And I think another thing I probably think about a lot because my background was in fine arts before architecture school. And so truly, I'm not really a three-dimensional thinker. But I think in flat planes. And so I'm always looking around for something flat where you can do something interesting. So it's interesting being partners because we're coming towards the same problem, but with really different sets of eyes. And although we will find an agreement, it's also from very different positions.
Yeah, I mean, flat planes are very cheap. That's a good thing, you know. And you can take cheap material and apply it, and if it's durable, everybody's happy. I don't know, it just seems, these all seem like sort of solving problems and trying to find some thought that's fresh and appropriate to the problem at hand. So when we got the ice rinks, they were expecting us to do an interior ice rink. And I said, hey, it's not environmentally the right thing to do. We're in a park. Why should we create an enclosed building in the park? Let's think about a natural open air rink. And we just have to cover it from the summer. You won't be able to have the same extended period that you might, but you know, a roof is cheaper than an enclosure. Kind of always trying to solve that problem, where you put your money and where you put your energy.
You did a lecture for us out in Iceland a very long time ago. You called that lecture Material Matters. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And that was a beautiful, I was just thinking about their continued interest in, like the word extraordinary is extraordinary, but you separate it.
Right. Well, because an architect's first task is a rather ordinary one. We serve. If you don't think you serve as a young architect, you're crazy. The only reason we do this work is because someone gives us an assignment. So the first thing is a very, very ordinary task. Somebody's got a problem, we solve it. And then, if you solve it deeply and you solve it well, then it can be that extra. And I don't know where that comes from, but it's a belief that the extra is added on to the ordinary. The ordinary isn't getting added onto the extra. The ordinary is the base. Like the concrete walls, the foundation is the base. You got to do the work, and then there's some other treasure there. And when I first started working, and I was just given the crappiest little things, I always said to some, look, I don't have to really do your whole, make this spectacular. I just need to do one little part that will make me and you feel good, that is not the assignment that you give me, the kitchen you've given me, your child's room. Let's do something that'll just be joyous. And that's the way it started. It was, you know, $100 extra on the budget. And then it began to invade things more as you could realize that that could also be a practical thing to do. It wasn't just a kind of folly. It was something that somehow was embedded in the problem. Sorry about that.
Two more questions or so?
Or none? Sorry, I went on a lot.
That's
Okay.
fascinating. Oh, I'm not a student here, but go ahead. Oh, wait, let's see, are there any students with questions? Okay. I usually can coax them.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, that was really so inspiring. Wondered if your design process has changed from when you started as architects to now, especially around technology and all that. I always wonder about, you know, the master architect who used to be able to take a pencil and kind of push the young architect out of the way and show him or her how to design, or, you know, with a stroke of a pencil. And now, of course, there's the role that technology plays in the process. So I was just wondering if your design process has changed. And the second question was, are there any challenges that you would really like to sort of tackle that you haven't tackled in types? Maybe it's a building type, or maybe urban scale, and then this is maybe related to some of the challenges that you see around you in architecture or urbanism.
Okay, you want to take on those, because those are both interesting.
Well, I know we're interested in working on low-cost housing.
And more public work. I feel embarrassed and ashamed we haven't pushed on this. I think we're capable of doing this and should be doing this.
So that's going backwards. And then in terms of the way design has changed now that we use computers, I think, well, certainly Todd and I are not using the computers in the office. But it's interesting that we sit down over drawings. The thinking drawings are still always done by hand. And then the computers are our tools. Then drawings are printed out. And then we sit down with the drawings and we draw on top of them by hand. But it's interesting, one of the tools that we use a lot now is whiteout. Because it's like you used to be, it was more additive at one point, because you're adding pencil, and so the drawings would get darker. Mylar drawings would get really dark, where you were drawing and erasing things, so you could sort of see where the attention was being paid. And now on a printout, it's almost like if you were blind, you could feel it by braille, because the whiteout sort of builds up on certain areas. And and really big sessions, you always end up with whiteout all up and down your arms. But in a certain way, it's erasing things.
I want to. You guys are just getting out of school, so I hope you can do this. This last weekend, we went to see both the Matisse show and the Picasso show. Matisse shows at the Met, Picasso shows at the Guggenheim. And I think we're not a master. There's no master stroke from this hand. Let me tell you, I don't have it. I would say I would liken myself in my dreams to be more like Matisse. If you go look at that show, you'll see that he started out usually with a rather vague idea of the painting he would do, and it would take him weeks to go from the first idea of the painting to the final idea of the painting. It's incredibly interesting and didactic, and he was always searching for something and eventually found his right. Picasso operates differently. I think that he was so incredibly confident, and I'm not, that he could almost put anything down, and he had such a huge range that even the mistakes were genius, at least today in our eyes. There is a lot of stuff that I thought was total crap, and now I'm looking at it, and you can even look at it, and some of the are genius. So I would have said that architects can't be geniuses, because we have too many people and too many things we have to work with at all times. We are more humble types and need to be more humble types, and recognize that the problem gives you the answers, your partner gives you the answers, the material, the stone could give you the answers, or the contractor can give you the answers. So I would say, to me, it is that which it continues, and ever more is important to the way I work, is that the answers are not here. They may be in my heart, or in a kind of maturity we've got, or something that we gain between us, or gain communally between us, but it is not, there's no genius. And ever more, there's less.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you.